Okay, so you are in the session of building resilience into urban planning and investments. It's all about the future that we're all trying to build in place in a world where more and more people are coming to our urban communities. Half of us live in cities today. By the middle of this century, 2/3 of us will live in cities. By the end of this century, 90% of us live in cities. There will be more investment in the next 40 years in urban areas than has happened in all of humanity. So getting it right is absolutely critical, and it will occur at the local level. So though we're meeting in the context of the United Nations, the future of this planet will be decided where each and every one of us lives. So that is the context that we're going to come in today. There will be opportunities to hear from each of you from the floor. I want to begin by introducing Juan Clos, who I knew when he was the mayor of Barcelona and who's now the Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Habitat. And I'm going to ask him if he would honor us with opening remarks. Juan Clos.
Okay, thank you very much. I am one of those that is going to speak in another language other than English. I am going to speak in Unish. Unish is the UN English, which is a variant of Globish, though only a little worse than Globish, because on top of having a smaller vocabulary like Globish, it has the acronyms and all these bloody words of the UN family. But I ask your patience, and if you cannot follow my words, just raise your hand and I will try to word in another manner. Thank you very much. I just wanted to offer you the view of our global urbanization observatory from the point of view of a UN system. As you know, UN Habitat, we are in charge of more or less having a general view of what are the tendencies of urbanization in the world, in order just to think for a better future and to see how this thing is going on. As David has said, we are in a process of increased and explosive urban growth. More and more people is living in urban areas, and that is going to increase even more in the next coming years. But I must tell you that we feel the sense that urbanization is in crisis. We have a problem. Urbanization is not going as expected. Urbanization is presenting several new challenges and problems which perhaps they were not thought of in the past. And as urbanization is in crisis and most of the population is urbanizing, here we have a dilemma. We need to think in a new future for urbanization. Urbanization is in crisis because, to begin with, in most of the parts of the world. In developed world, the urbanization is in crisis because of the increased cost of living in the cities. The city is becoming a very expensive entourage. It's becoming a place which is displacing poor people to the peripheries. It's it's creating problems of congestion. It's creating these problems of inequality, these problems of burning districts. Even today or yesterday, we have seen Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, which burning districts, which is really something unexpected. That means that, well, we saw in the past Paris, in the Paris districts, it was burning of neighborhoods. We have seen that in several parts of the world. And this modern world or developed world uneasiness about the city life. Something is not going as expected in the cities. There's a second crisis in the developed world, and this is the fiscal crisis of cities. Most of the cities, they don't have enough resources to keep the maintenance of the infrastructure. And if you listen to mayors all around the developed world, you will see that most of them talk about the need to raise more money. And we are in a situation where this is becoming more difficult. There's a competition between central government, regional government, and local government for fiscal scarce resources. There's, some kind of fights, and this is putting some cities in the developed world in a very difficult position to keep their infrastructure. In developing world, we have another total different reality, but also a very critical one. In the developing world, we are seeing how urbanization is taking place without urban planning. Then the most of the growth in developing world cities and urban realities is done in a spontaneous way, without urban planning, without enough public space, and then without the most basic principles or preconditions for a proper infrastructure. There's no need to say that the local governments in developing world, they have huge problem of financial resources. And I mention local governments when they exist, because there's plenty of places where there's no such a thing as a real and performing local government. That means that this huge urbanization that we are seeing, developing very fast, is done without the minimal conditions of becoming a reasonable and efficient urbanization process. We have other realities of crisis of urbanization also that are coming up and they are being perceived. For example, there's the crisis of the new urbanization of China. If you follow at the news on China and you see what is happening with air contamination and congestion in new Chinese cities, it's a very, challenging reality, because those cities are new. They have been recently built. And then with all this crisis, we are saying, well, what is happening with the urbanization that is not going at this global level? There are, of course, very good exceptions, but in general, why is this crisis of urbanization? I think that the crisis of urbanization comes because we are still urbanizing with the urban model of the 20th century. We are still urbanizing more or less following the modern urbanization style, which came after the Congress of Modern Urbanism and Architecture in 1933. And it was changed a little bit and adapted after the Second World War, but it has produced this kind of international model of urbanization, when most of the peripheries of the cities in the world, they look the same. The buildings, they are very similar, and the patterns of the streets also, they are very similar. And this model of the 20th century urbanization is not serving the conditions, social and economic conditions of the 21st century. This is why we are promoting a broad debate in UN Habitat. We are advocating for a global debate on urbanization in order to review the 20th century urbanization model and move to a 21st century urbanization model. And we are going to do that in parallel with all our stakeholders, and all of you are invited, of course, to that, following the UN Development Goals revision and the post-2015 development model. As we are talking about the reviewing of the development model for the world, we need to talk, of course, about the new urbanization model for this development. And this process of debate that it's beginning now, and this is why we are inviting you to it, it will culminate in 2016 in the celebration of Habitat 3. In Habitat 3, Habitat 1, Habitat 2 were celebrated in 65, Habitat 1 in Vancouver, 76 in Vancouver, 96 in Istanbul, and 2016, 20 years later, in a city that is still not decided, and we will see this debate of what is the world state of urbanization. As resilience and risk reduction and capacity to prepare the cities for disasters, man-made or nature began model, we need to include in the genes of the new model of urbanization these modalities. The new urbanization should embody in its constituency this preparedness for risk reduction and disaster prevention. I think that this is one of the ways that we need to make sure that in this process of preparing this world debate in search of a more sustainable, equitable, and efficient urban model, we make sure then that from the first steps that includes urban resilience. This is the message in a very short period of time to explain to you, and I really, we will be ready to share with all of you, and in whatever platform of debate, these ideas in order to really shake a little bit the existing model of urbanization. We are urbanizing still in this international model with too few compactness or density. Most of the cities or the neighborhoods that we are building, they are around or less than 4,000 inhabitants per kilometer square. No, 9 billion humans cannot live in planet Earth at densities of less than 4,000 inhabitants per kilometer square. Forget about this kind of periphery urbanizations. The model of urbanization of the 20th century is a zone model. Industry is here, business district is there, residential is there, university is there, shopping is there. This kind of sectorial uses of land generates a huge demand of mobility. And as mobility is becoming expensive, these kind of cities are not economically, not just environmentally. Of course, environmentally, until we don't find a new fuel, they are not sustainable. But the problem is not that they are not just unsustainable because of the environment. They are economically unsustainable. They are too expensive. This form of urbanization is too expensive for the poor families. And even for the middle class. And this is a conflict that it's emerging all over the world, and still we have not reacted providing a new model of urbanization. As I said, the new model of urbanization that we foresee, until we find a better one, is mixed uses, higher compactness, more public space, and this concept of walkability or proximity, let's say, and social integration. This model of urbanization, which generally everybody agrees that is very good, really when we begin to draw it, you know, new problems emerge, because this is not so easy to sell. You need to design it very well to be attractive, and you need to introduce a kind of a different set of issues which transform this mixed city and compact city from an appealing form of life to transform it as a pleasant, nice, and beautiful form of life. And this is the huge change that we need to do. And it's economical change, but also it's a cultural change. And this is the change that should include from the beginning the concept of resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. We're now going to go to two city examples. The first one is going to be presented by Mayor Don Zimmer, the mayor of Hoboken. Hoboken is just across from New York City and, of course, suffered as part of the Sandy flooding. So, Don, are you mic'd?
Yes. Okay, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Mayor Don Zimmer, and it is my honor to be here as again, I'm Hoboken Mayor Don Zimmer, and as a representative of the United States, I would like to ask if we could just have a moment of silence for my fellow citizens in Oklahoma. Thank you very much. So I wanted to give everyone, I also want to give a special thank you to UNISDR for coming to Hoboken after Hurricane Sandy, inviting me to be a part of the Resilient Cities campaign, and inviting me to speak here today. So I'm new to the program, but I'm very excited to be here and really appreciative of this great conference that they have put together. So I'm going to just run you through some images. I want to give you a positive impression of Hoboken. You may have seen a lot of negative views of Hoboken, but I just want to show you some images of Hoboken, and then I'll continue the discussion. So just to orient everyone, actually if we could turn down the lights, just to orient everyone, Hoboken is right across the river from New York City. And literally, you can take a ferry, you can take the PATH train, and it's less than 10 minutes to get to the Village or Midtown Manhattan. So we really have phenomenal access to New York City. We are, as you can see, actually 1 square mile, and we have 50,000 people in that 1 square mile. We have a very diverse community. I'm proud to say that we have the mixed use that we were talking about just a few minutes ago. And we're looking forward to doing any future development in a very, very resilient way. This is Washington Street, which thankfully did not flood. This is an arts and music festival that we have twice a year, and we have lots of festivals throughout the year in Hoboken. This is an outdoor cafe. We're only 1 square mile, but we have over 100 outdoor cafes, so lots of great restaurants and places to go out in Hoboken. This is Pier A along the waterfront, which you'll see from the map. It did not flood at all. This is Pier A when we had a Mumford & Sons concert, and we've got Bob Dylan playing this summer. And you can see the skyline of New York City. That's the Empire State Building in the distance. And this is a map that kind of shows you where, actually, you know what, I'm going to go to the one, this map shows it better. So the blue is where all the flooding occurred. So 80% of our city flooded. The water came in, you can see on the left, that's the south and the north, and came in and went to the back of the city, and literally, as I was quoted in the New York Times, filled up our city like a bathtub. So it was 80%, $100 million at least in damage to private property owners, $10 million to the city of Hoboken. This is, southern portion. My house is, actually you can see my house, it's over on the left. So I slept at City Hall, and my husband hunkered down with my 2 sons. This is a train station actually right next to Pier A, but again, that's where the water came in. This is the PATH station. The PATH was down for 2 months, and it was really, really a huge impact on our businesses, because Hoboken is a very walkable city, and when people didn't have that regular walking schedule, they were not going out, they were not shopping as much in Hoboken, and some businesses saw a 60% decrease as a result of the PATH being down for 2 months, so it was a really severe impact on them. And as you can see, $800 million in estimated damages for the Port Authority. This is just some, more images of, we had the National Guard come in, so we were flooded for 5 solid days, and people stuck in their homes, not able to reach them. Well, we were able to reach them, and we did evacuations, but not able to reach them via the internet or anything like that. Just some more images. These are the upper right-hand side are 3 substations of our, were put in the western side of the city, so they were totally flooded out. And that's why it took over a week. They had to look for all those circuit breakers, which are old circuit breakers and very difficult to find. It was described to me like finding a needle in the haystack to find those circuit breakers. This is an image that went viral. This is from the north end of Hoboken. On the boat, it says, "Global warming is real." And I'm just going to jump through. So just to give you, again, an overview, if you can turn the lights back on now. I believe Hoboken, in order to protect our city going forward, I am advocating for taking a new approach, which means I think that with the flooding that we experience, we have the opportunity to shelter within place. We need to build stronger and be more resilient. And so I think that we can have layers of protection, and that's what I want to talk to all of you about. I'm advocating for stronger building codes and new designs. I'm working with the state. I think a lot of those designs, this is maybe getting into the weeds, but it's a big issue when you think about the future of urban America and urban areas across the world. I think we need flood-proof, resilient elevators. The designs that are coming out right now is literally, you're taking a ramp and you're going across the entire building and then switch back. So to me, it's a horrific design. It's not really wheelchair friendly. I can't even imagine the seniors that I know kind of maneuver their wheelchair up a long ramp that's literally a switchback. And you're talking about destroying the landscape of urban America. I mean, what's great about Hoboken is totally walkable, bike-friendly, you got mixed use, you got restaurants. You take away the life on the street and just replace it with ramps all over the place, it's ridiculous. And I'm working hard to change that design. So it's a small issue, but it's a big issue from my perspective. And I also think that there's a lot of things that we can do, getting people to raise the mechanicals and, so anyway, I'm working hard on kind of changing those design standards on retrofitting buildings now, and obviously looking towards the future, towards those design standards. I've also worked on developing a comprehensive approach to addressing our flooding. I'm working hard on advocating. Our federal government really, unfortunately, takes a very suburban approach, and the policies are all against urban America. So I'll just explain what I'm proposing as solutions, and then I can talk to you a little bit more about why those policies are so against America. So I don't know if I can get a pointer, but along the waterfront, we're proposing 3 more pumps. That would be, we have 1 pump, so those 3 more pumps would be the emergency measure that helps us to pump out that water when that storm surge hits. And also the big issue for Hoboken is when we get high tide and heavy rainfall, we are flooded. We had severe flooding just 2 weeks ago, and we have a combined sewer system. So with a combined sewer system, that means we got rainwater and sewage water on our city streets on a regular basis. It just happened 2 weeks ago. So we're trying to put pumps, more pumps along the waterfront, but then we're trying to do everything that we can to retain the rainwater and capture the rainwater. So you see the white, on the left, there's 3 white areas where we are already negotiating and we have bonded and we're trying to buy land for park space. And we just got a grant yesterday, so we're looking forward to exploring the feasibility. Can we turn that into an underground parking that also becomes, storage for the floodwaters, or can it just be a large detention basin? And we're going through a master planning process where we want to incentivize everyone to have green roofs, porous pavers, rain barrels, gray water technology. We want to be absolutely as green as possible. And then the last piece that we're looking at, and we're trying to get to be a part of the Army Corps comprehensive study that's being done, is the feasibility of literally creating a protective barrier both on the south and on the north. So either through a combination of flood walls, hardening existing development, combining it with future development to literally provide protection for the city. I'm very interested in doing this for several reasons. One, it would provide protection for the entire city, and two, it will financially protect the city because we have to pay into a national flood insurance program that we don't get any money back on. So it's literally, it's going to be, those rates are going to skyrocket, and it's going to be a disaster for the city of Hoboken. And so I'm looking, if I can demonstrate to the federal government that we are protecting our city, then we could possibly get out of the National Flood Insurance Program. So I'm looking to really try and comprehensively protect the city. And just to let you know, the way FEMA works, there's lots of money for public assistance. So I had, in the blue area, I had all kinds of public buildings that had major damage. They will give me money to put floodgates around every individual building. They will give me lots of money. Whatever money I ask for, if it's on that individual property, they'll give me that money. But they will not give me money to go towards a comprehensive plan. I'm advocating, I think we're making headway, but that's when I'm talking about having an urban approach. They should, they need to rethink it, and that's what I'm talking about. With the National Flood Insurance Program, they give $30,000 in incentives for people to raise their homes up on pilings. Well, with an 8-story building, I can't raise that up on pilings. It's not possible, and if it is possible, it's way, way too expensive. So I'm saying, instead of giving me, I would love it. I know this is just a dream, but if they gave me $30,000 for every property owner that had damage, I would have $52 million with which to work to try and protect the entire city of Hoboken. The last piece that I'm working on is energy resiliency. I mean, I think it's extremely important, obviously, and I'm proud to say that on June 5th, we are having a formal signing with the Department of Energy, Sandia National Lab, and PSE&G, our electric company. We're going to be exploring our entire electrical grid, looking at the feasibility of a microgrid system. And I am advocating for PSE&G. They have a plan for the entire state of New Jersey to upgrade the entire system for like $3 billion. The challenge with that is the likelihood of them getting that funding is pretty limited. So I'm also going to be interested to explore the possibility of a public-private partnership, because when you consider, you saw the damage, what New Jersey Transit, the damage that New Jersey Transit had, the damage that the Port Authority had. This is the Housing Authority is all in the, is all back in the western side of the city. The current development, future development, there's a lot of opportunities for partnerships to really come together and get the funding for this and build a much more resilient energy system as well. So that's something else that I'm really looking to do. All of this takes a lot of consensus building. So the last piece that I want to say is just I'll just show you this image. We had a resilience run in Hoboken, and I want to give a special thank you to Margareta and her team for reaching out and inviting me to be a part of the resilience campaign. We did this run. In short order, we had almost 2,000 runners. It was great to raise awareness, and that's the reality, is we got to develop the plan, and we got to campaign, essentially, and get the buy-in from both the public and all of the stakeholders who are involved in this. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Dawn. I think it's really important that all of us think, every time we see a disaster on the news, what is it that we can learn for our locality in terms of building in more resilience into the future? We have to learn from others' example. And I think when you see a city like New York and a city like Hoboken that go through this kind of suffering, we all have things to learn from that. And the question really is, how do we learn that and how do we begin to implement that as quickly as possible? Our second presenter is Mayor Emilio Graterón, who is the mayor of Chaco in Venezuela, and he's going to talk more about how you involve the public in the processes going forward. Mayor.
Thank you, David. I like to speak in Spanish because my English is not that perfect like the Joan Claus English. Bien.
En la
Thank you.
plataforma se oye, se escucha.
Can you hear
¿Me
me?
escuchan?
Can you hear me?
En la plataforma latinoamericana
As part of the Latin
sobre
American
reducción de riesgo de
platform for
desastre,
disaster risk
hicimos
reduction,
un planteamiento que
we
quiero traer a esta mesa.
had a particular
Nosotros
consideration
planteamos
which
que
I
era
would like
muy
to expose to you.
importante dejar muy
It was
claro
very important for
que
us
a partir de
that
el esfuerzo que se ha ido haciendo,
as
tenemos
of
que
the
dejar
effort that was being carried out,
tener como centro el desastre
that
y comenzar a tener
we
como
need to not
centro
only
la
pay attention
resiliencia
to the
de nuestro
disaster
pensamiento.
aspect, but that the
por
resilience
eso
aspect was
debemos
very
cambiar
important. And that's why
un paradigma,
we need to change,
dejar
we
de
need to
ser
have a
los
paradigm
profetas del
shift
desastre
away
convertirnos
from
en líderes
disasters and
de la
to be
resiliencia para el
resilience
cambio de
leaders
nuestras ciudades.
so that we can change
Ese
our
cambio de
cities.
paradigmas trae
This
como consecuencia
change of paradigm
una
has as a
cantidad de
consequence
cambios importantes en la forma de
important
actuar como
changes
gestores
in the
públicos,
way we
como,
act as
líderes
public
políticos
authorities
inclusive.
and as governments.
Esa realidad
That
permite que el
reality
proceso de planificación
is
de la
that
ciudad y el proceso
urban
de
planning
construcción de soluciones
and
resilientes
the
para
building
la
of
reducción del
resilient
riesgo de
solutions
desastres
to
deje de ser un
achieve
proceso
DRR
técnico,
needs to
puramente
be
técnico,
a
que se
technical
co- y-
exercise
y un proceso
and
que solamente se
an
ve como de arriba hacia
exercise
abajo,
that
como
should not
unos
only be
gigantes que están
bottom
parados sobre un
top
plano
down,
de la ciudad y que van decidiendo sobre las cosas encima de ese
but,
plano.
but that we
Y
need to
comenzamos un
act
proceso de
at
planificación
different
con
levels
los
as well.
pies
So we
puestos
need
en la
to
tierra,
also work
compartiendo los
from the
problemas
ground up,
de la gente que vive la ciudad,
considering the
haciendo de la
problems
planificación
that the
un proceso
citizens
humano.
face,
La
so that the
planificación, un
planning
proceso
process becomes
hecho
a
a partir
human
de la gente,
process
con la
that
gente.
comes and that
Y eso
involves the
es
people.
un cambio importante,
This is an important
debido a que
change for
eso
us
trae un cambio cultural
because
en la
this is
ciudad.
a cultural
Las ciudades
change for the city.
latinoamericanas, como
Latin
muchas
American
ciudades del mundo,
cities, just as is the case with many other cities in the world,
que generan
are
resiliencia particular
are
de grupos o de
confronted
personas.
with different situations where
Y
there can
el
be
llamado que
resistance
nosotros
to
hemos
change
hecho
from
y la
different
experiencia que hemos
groups.
tenido
The experience
es
that
que con
we've
este cambio de
had
paradigma,
is
cuando
that
nosotros
with
nos
this
convertimos en líderes
change
de
of
la ciudad,
paradigm,
con una visión
when
resiliente,
we have
no
this
para,
resilience
solamente para reducir el
view,
riesgo de desastres, sino
not
para tener
just
una
to confront
actitud
disasters,
resiliente
but
ante
to
la realidad de la
have
ciudad.
a resilient
identificar
attitude
líderes
towards
sociales
all problems in the city. So we need to be
de hace ver gente que
social
frente a un problema
leaders
convierte
in
ese
resilience
problema en una
terms. And
Y a
that
partir de
way,
ese problema,
we can consider
integras a las
problems
a esas
concretely
personas
from
al
that
proceso de
perspective.
planificación a través de la
That means that
participación.
those
Y
that are
esos
involved with
ejemplos de
planning
resiliencia particular
ensure participation so that we can consider
participativa
those
procesos
resilience
colectivos,
items
se
in a
genera un
participative
hecho de liderazgo
process.
colectivo
And that
que resulta
achieves a
en una-
collective
en
sense
una
of
realidad
leadership
de resiliencia
and
colectiva.
achieves this collective
Quiero explicar esto con
resilience. I want to
algunos
explain
casos
this
concretos
with
rápidamente.
several concrete examples, if I
En mi
may.
ciudad,
In
y
my
lo hablaba
city,
ahorita con Joan,
I was talking with
el
Johan
principal
earlier,
problema de mi
the
ciudad
main problem of my
se
city
convirtió hace unos años para acá.
that has been
se
taking place
convirtió
over the
en
last
la
few
seguridad.
years is
El
a
problema
problem
es el
of
crecimiento de hechos
safety,
delictivos, el
security.
problema del crecimiento
the
de
the issue
situaciones de
that are
ataques a
linked
personas
to
en la
growth
vía
because
pública,
of
de secuestros de personas en la
crime,
vía pública,
of
hizo que la gente en mi
kidnappings
ciudad cambiara su
and
manera de
violence in my
Y, como
city.
en muchas ciudades del mundo,
And as is the
hace
case
unos años
in many
también
cities
comenzó a-
over the
a
last few
surgir
years,
el fenómeno de la
the
gente que corría o corre por las
leaders
calles.
have
Lo que llaman los runners.
have gone to
de
see
las
what was
calles.
going on in the streets
Y esa gente
themselves.
corría solos.
And
Corrían solos por
we
las
had
calles y
different
empezaron
people
a
that would go
decidir
throughout the cities,
retirarse de la calle
and then
por los problemas de seguridad.
because of safety issues, personal safety
Yo
issues, they
personalmente,
weren't able to
con
go
el
throughout the
paradigma
whole
de
of
la
the city.
resiliencia lo fui
So
buscando
considering this
y los
resilience
reuní y
issue,
les dije,
I
"Hay que ser
brought
resilientes
together these people
y
and I
frente
said to
a
them,
este
we have to be
problema,
resilient.
tenemos
And
que
given this
convertirlo en una
problem, we
oportunidad.
need to convert this
No
problem into an
abandonemos las calles
opportunity. We
porque son
cannot
inseguras.
give up the
Todo
city
lo
because
contrario.
because of a question of
Seamos
insecurity.
resilientes y tomemos
We
las
need to
calles en
change this
colectivo.
paradigm. We need to
¿Y
collectively
cuál fue el
address
gran
this
cambio?
problem.
No fue que la gente
And when there was
abandonó las
this
calles,
important
los corredores
change,
abandonaron las calles porque las
when
calles se
the
convirtieron
people that were
en inseguras, sino
jogging
que ahora
in the
los
cities,
corredores corren juntos.
now the
Y ahora
joggers
tenemos grupos de
run
300,
together.
400 y 500 corredores en grupo,
So we can have even
tomando
very
todas las
big
calles
groups of
de
even
la
more than
ciudad
100 joggers
cierta
all
hora.
together. So at
¿Y
certain
eso qué
times,
hizo? ¿Qué
we open up
produjo?
the
Que la
city
delincuencia
to
se fue de la ciudad.
joggers so that
Porque no
they
tenían a
can
quién robar.
go into the city and do their
Esa
sport
gente con una actitud
without
resiliente fue integrada al proceso de
being
planificación
having
de
any
la
risk
ciudad.
of being attacked
Y
or
gracias a
robbed.
ellos les recomiendo que anoten
So,
esta dirección
there's
electrónica.
this
la dirección
uh,
electrónica de mi municipio,
my so it's chacao point gov.ve is our website.
C-O, Chacao.
Chacao is spelled with a C-H.
Y ahí verán
A-C-A-O.
que esos corredores en el proceso de planificación
So
terminaron siendo unos
those joggers, as
veedores
part of
importantísimos
the
del
planning
sistema de
process,
drenajes de la
they
ciudad.
were an important vector
Y no solamente allí en la
for
página web
our
puede ver una
message.
cosa que se
And you
llama
can
el
see on the
infomapa,
website,
que
there's
te
this
dice, cuando tú marcas un punto
information
y llegas a
map.
otro lugar, te dice cuál
It
es la distancia
shows
que vas a
you what the
recorrer corriendo cuando quieres
distance
correr.
you will run
La planificación
if
de
you
tu
follow a
carrera. Y
certain
lo que te dice
itinerary.
cuántos
And it also
cuántos drenajes de aguas de lluvia hay en el
tells you
proceso de esa
also,
carrera.
as you run
Y
along
los
there,
corredores
all the
van
drains
advirtiendo
that
cuáles están
exist.
funcionando bien, cuáles están
And
funcionando
then
mal,
the joggers
cuáles
can
tienen
give
ensucio, cuáles no.
information about the
Y
drains
se
that are blocked
integran
and those that are
al
working.
proceso de crear un
So
sistema
we created
resiliente
a
que reduce el
resilient
riesgo de
system
desastre.
that
Pero no
reduces
porque la
disaster risk,
resiliencia se convierta
but
en una actitud
not
para reducir el riesgo de desastre
for
como tal,
resilience
sino que la ciudad
itself,
completa
but
tiene una actitud
also
resiliente. Es
so
decir,
that the
dejamos de
city
ser la
itself
gente
has
que
a
está todo el
resilient
tiempo gritando que va a haber un
attitude.
desastre, y
So it's not just a
comenzamos
question of saying,
ser
hey,
la
there's a
gente que
disaster here or
promueve
there's a
la
problem here,
resiliencia.
but we're
Por eso
being
nosotros
proactive.
decíamos, hay que
We're involving
correr para la
citizens. And
resiliencia.
that's why
Hay
you
que
need to
convertirnos en
run for
corredores de la
resilience. That's why you
resiliencia.
need to have
Y tenemos aquí también
resilient
otro ejemplo,
joggers.
con el apoyo de
And there was
Groups
another
International.
example from,
Mujeres de un sector popular que tenían
of
una-
women
un
who
río
were
que generaba
in
muchísimo riesgo, se
a
organizaron
neighborhood by a
y se
river,
convirtieron en
got
mujeres líderes de su
organized,
comunidad
and they
que
became leaders
disminuyeron
of
el
their
riesgo de ese río
community.
porque
They wanted
lo
to reduce the
convirtieron en
risk
un
from
parque
the
de la
river,
colectividad.
and they wanted to make it a problem
Lo
of
limpiaron,
the
lo arreglaron
collective.
y
They
en un
cleaned
sitio que era
the river
una zona de riesgo por
side,
la basura y por las
banks,
situaciones que ahí se
and
presentaban
and
de
they
falta de sentido social, se
and
convirtió en una
they
oportunidad
changed
y las
their
mujeres
attitude,
de
their
esa zona
social
popular
attitude
se convirtieron
from
en las
it being somebody
principales
else's problem to their
veedoras de
own
la
problem.
limpieza de ese
And
lugar.
so they helped in the
decir,
cleanup of the river, and
el
they
proceso
would
de planificación,
have oversight
al
over their
integrar
own
a la gente, se
river
convierte en un
banks.
proceso de apropiación
So
de
it's
la
a
gente
question
de su
of
ciudad.
ownership,
Y al hacerlo
that
con una
the citizens
visión
are
resiliente,
owners, and
dejamos de
in
ser
that process
una gente
become
que está todo
resilient.
el
So
tiempo
it's not a
pensando en
question
el
of just
desastre,
be
y
thinking
comenzamos a
about
ser una gente que
disaster, but
está
that we
todo
be
el tiempo
proactively
haciendo las cosas que hay que hacer para que el
doing
desastre no
those
se
things
produzca.
so that disaster
¿Cuál ha
doesn't
sido el
happen.
resultado de eso? En
Thanks to
octubre de
this,
2011 se produjeron
in
las
October
peores inundaciones
2012, where we
que ha
had the
tenido
worst
mi
floods
ciudad, la ciudad
that
de
a
Caracas,
city
que soy el
of
centro de la
Caracas
ciudad de
had. I'm at the center
Las
of the
peores
city of
inundaciones que
Caracas.
tuvo la ciudad
We
de
had the
Caracas
worst
en los
floods
últimos 50
over the last 50
En el
years,
único sitio
and the
de la ciudad
only
donde no
place
sucedió nada, no
where
hubo
we had
desastres,
no problem, where we didn't
gracias a
have
la
a disaster,
resiliencia,
and thanks to the
fue en mi
resilience,
municipio.
was in my
No hubo ni un
municipality.
solo centímetro de afectación
we only had
Gracias a que
just
durante
about a
4 años
centimeter
estuvimos
of
trabajando con la
water.
gente para diseñar una
And
planificación
this was
urbana
all thanks to
donde
the urban
constantemente
planning,
la
where
gente está dando
constantly
información,
we were
donde
getting
constantemente la gente está
information
participando. Y una
from
de
the
esas cosas
citizens.
constantes
And
es
one of
esta bolsa,
these
por
is
ejemplo.
this bag, for instance.
Cada persona de
Each
nuestro municipio ha sido
person
visitada
of
para
the municipality
convencerlos de
has
asumir
been
una actitud
visited
resiliente.
to take on
Y
a
ahí
resilient
está un plan
attitude.
enorme
And
de
this was
planificación
a
colectiva con la
huge
gente.
collective planning
¿Quién
process.
impulsa este plan?
And who
El gobierno
led
local, sí,
this? The
pero
government, of
¿quién lo
course.
apoya?
But
¿Quién lo
who,
financia?
how was
¿Quién
it
lo
supported
promueve?
and how was it
Lo que se hace
financed
con
and
recursos no
promoted?
solamente
This was
financieros, sino
not
humanos.
just through
La empresa
financial and human
privada.
resources, it was the private
Aquí
sector.
tenemos el logo de una empresa
Here we have the
petrolera que
logo
tiene su
of
sede
an
en
oil
mi
company
municipio,
that has
que
its
asumió el
headquarters
reto
in
de no
my
solo hacer su
municipality
edificio seguro, sino
that
hacer edificios,
accepted
todos
the
los edificios a su
challenge
alrededor seguros.
to ensure that all the
Y con la
buildings in
integración de la
its
empresa privada y
neighborhoods
quienes dan los
be
cursos, quienes participan, quienes se
safer.
integran en el
And,
proceso de
and
planificación
all of
colectiva
those
son
that
los
were
empleados de la
involved
empresa,
were
junto con
the
nosotros.
employees of the company,
Y
together
así
with
hacemos que
us.
con la
And
empresa
so,
privada, el gobierno
with
local
the
y la
private sector and the
participación de la
local
gente,
government
la ciudad
and
se
the
haya ido
involvement of
transformando
the
en una
citizenry,
ciudad con actitud
we can
resiliente.
have a resilient
Y los
attitude.
procesos de planificación se
And
se
the
convirtieron en
planning
procesos de
process
participación
becomes a
muy
participative
intensiva.
process,
Y la
which is
planificación
very
está sometida a
intensely
revisión constante
participative.
y evaluación constante.
And we are
Y
constantly
eso permite que cada día seamos más fuertes,
evaluating and
cada día seamos
changing,
más resilientes, y
and
no
every
solamente
day we will
resilientes
be
frente
more
al riesgo de un
resilient,
desastre,
not
sino
just
cualquier problema
before disasters, but all
en África,
problems.
en
In
Latinoamérica,
Africa,
y en
in
muchos
Latin
sitios del
America,
mundo,
and in
la
many
gente
places in
es
the world,
obligada a ser resiliente porque es
people
sometida a
need to be
grandes problemas
resilient
de
because
supervivencia
they
todos
are
los días.
confronted to
Tenemos
problems
que
of
aprovechar esa
survival.
resiliencia y tenemos
We
que
need to
convertirla
be
en una fortaleza
resilient,
para
and
la
we need
ciudad.
to convert that into a
La
strength.
concentración urbana hace que esos
The
problemas
concentration
y esa actitud
of
resulte la
people in
principal
cities
fortaleza para
means
transformar
that
nuestras ciudades,
we need
y
to
que dejen
make
de
that
ser
our strength
ciudades
so that
planificadas
our
para
cities
evitar
are
problemas
planned
y
to
comiencen a
avoid
ser
problems
ciudades
and
planificadas
become
para vivir
cities
bien.
where you
Ciudades
live, where
hechas
there is
para la gente,
well-being.
ciudades humanas, como dice el eslogan de Bogotá. Y eso es el
And
objetivo y
this
eso ha
is
sido el
the
resultado
objective and the
meter el
result
cambio de
of
paradigma de la resiliencia en el
a
proceso
paradigm
de
shift
planificación
in the planning
participativa
process
de la ciudad,
that's
donde
participative,
la sociedad se convierte en un equipo, como un equipo de
where
fútbol,
society
donde
becomes
los
a
privados,
team, like a football
los
team,
públicos y el
where
gobierno
the
local
public and private
son
sector
parte de ese equipo.
and other
Y
authorities as
así
well
todos logran el
become
objetivo
part
común,
of a team, and
como un equipo.
that's how we achieve a
Gracias.
common objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilio. I think there's a real message in this for those of us who live in the global north or in other parts of the global south, that there is a huge amount to learn right now from what is happening in Latin America in terms of popular participation in the planning process. And ultimately, if we're going to achieve real disaster resilience, it's going to be because the people get it and are deeply, deeply involved. So I commend you for the work you're doing. We're now going to go on and see a movie, a film, called Imagine a City, that's presented by the International Tunneling and Underground Space Association. And I've been asked to inform you that this is a global premiere. So eat your heart out, Cannes. Are we ready with the video?
Our city mayors, public policy leaders, and our planners face many challenges in the next 40 years. Margareta Wallström says, unless we act now, we will see more and more disasters due to unplanned urbanization and environmental degradation. Juan Clos echoes that, saying we need to demonstrate that change is possible through the genius, creativity, and audacity of people and decision makers to make the wisest choices for our urban future. Imagine a city with a historic centre, a city with planning legislation prohibiting the demolition of heritage buildings, a city with height regulations limiting new buildings to 8 floors. Imagine that historic city centre needing new social and transport infrastructure, living and office space, leisure facilities. Where would you find the space to fit all this in? You'd find it here, in the Earth Scraper, a 65-floor deep, inverted skyscraper. This is all the space you need with no compromise on the existing urban fabric. The Earth Scraper is an inverted pyramid with a central void, allowing all underground habitable space to enjoy natural light and ventilation. In the last 30 years, the world has had to cope with nearly 3,500 floods. Intense rainfall is now a major hazard for cities. So imagine a city with a thriving central business district, but one that is flooded on average once a year, severely disrupting commercial life. How can you prevent this? In Kuala Lumpur, you do it the smart way, with an underground solution combining both a road and a stormwater management tunnel. Next, imagine a city under threat from major earthquakes. A city that has previously experienced the collapse of its vital infrastructure, severely hindering disaster relief efforts. Now imagine that same city making use of resilient underground infrastructure, much less susceptible to earthquakes. A city where even after a major quake, essential aid can be distributed and life protected. As the world's population increases, our cities are becoming increasingly overcrowded, the available space almost all taken. But cities must be livable to be loved. They need open and green areas, public spaces for a society to enjoy. Imagine creating those spaces below the surface, parkland beneath the urban centre. Meet the Low Line, a private initiative in the Lower East Side of New York City, reusing an unwanted, forgotten underground tramway depot and giving it new life. Now imagine your city using its underground space, becoming more resilient against natural disaster and the effects of climate change, developing sustainably through the use of geothermal energy, integrating surface and below surface development, creating new connections and increasing livability, rapidly transporting people through underground systems that double up as cargo and disaster relief infrastructure. We know about underground space. Now you know too.
And our first panelist is Ms. Antonia Cornaro, who is the Secretary General of ITACUS, the International Tunneling and Underground Space Association. Antonia.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great pleasure to have a first screening of our newly produced video. What we're aiming to do with this is to show and raise your imagination, show the effects rapid urbanization has on our cities, show what natural disasters have in effects on our urban infrastructure, and raise a bit the question, can we do more about it than we're doing now? And Juan Claude said it in his opening speech today, we need new levels of urbanization. And we also need more public space with all these people crowding into cities. So we really believe we need to use underground space more efficiently and plan for it. We have a working relationship with ISOCARP, the International Society of Cities and Regional Planners, to work on specific global case studies, which we're launching right now, to research this topic further, to see what is the investment that's going in, because that's always the key question, and what is the real impact, and what can be the tangible results. So just yesterday, because David said, when you see disaster in the news, pick up on it. Think about what can you do to implement better ways. I saw just yesterday a brief news snap on tornadoes in the US, and the cost of affecting the states in the United States is like between 1.5 and 3 billion for each of the major tornadoes. And that's, of course, insane amount in these times of scarce public financing. So, and also the solution they've come up with to put in more underground shelters for people, where they get a 15-minute warning, and they're underground and they're safe and they can survive the storm. Dawn, the mayor of Hoboken, said there's, of course, a lot of ways to deal with this. You can build more resilient infrastructure above ground as well, but I think we need to consider the underground in this as well. We've seen examples of Kuala Lumpur and the recent floods in Bangkok, and in Japan at the recent tsunamis and earthquakes, where the underground infrastructure remained largely unaffected. And I think that's just so important in saving lives in the future, and also in keeping our cities running and operational. If I hear a PATH train that connects New Jersey with New York City was closed down for 2 months, do you know what that means in terms of commuters pendling back and forth between these two states? I lived in New York. I know how heavily used the PATH is. The whole city breaks down. So we cannot deal with, we cannot afford that. So why not think about underground space? Imagine a city where that is a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonia. Our second commentator is Dr. Cassidy Johnson of the University College London, who was with the UNISDR Urban Planning Working Group.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'd like to talk about a working group that is being put together by UNISDR, and which I've been asked, I'm from University College London, and being asked to lead this working group on urban planning and disaster resilience. The idea of this working group is to develop a mandate, or the mandate of the working group is to develop a guidance for urban planners, city managers, and other actors who are working in urban development. So looking at communities, private sector, landowners, NGOs, looking at the wider range of actors who are involved in urban planning. And what we're trying to look at are, as have been the examples presented here today by the mayors and by Ithacus, sort of practical solutions towards looking at disaster resilience, technical solutions, governance solutions. And really what we want to do is build a very strong evidence base of practices that influence both urban resilience and community resilience. And helping cities to improve and to develop as rapid urbanization is happening in many cities around the world, trying to shape this resilience in the future coming forward. So the idea of the working group, I had a slide, so I don't know if it's going up there. Thank you. We have over 70 professionals who are planners or in related disciplines who are part of the working group at this point, and we have about 12 people who are core members of the working group. And what we want to do is to strengthen the knowledge about planning practices, looking at case study cities with partner cities, cities that are part of the campaign, or cities that want to become part of the campaign, that are doing innovative practices in urban planning. And we also want to work with cities that have been not doing innovative practices in urban planning, that have issues in developing good plans and planning and city development, and helping those that are in the early stages of engaging in resilience. As part of the working group, we're also going to be doing working on planning education and capacity building through university programs, through capacity building with planners in cities, and generally strengthening networks. So if you're from a city who's interested to be involved, please get in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a large message there is use the university talent in your community to help you with becoming more resilient. They can learn from your experiences, and nothing better than for a student to actually have a practical application. Our next speaker, and I hope I don't butcher the name too much, is Dr. Afisea Death Insisien Ngame, who is the Urban Planning Division, Department of Housing and Urban Planning, the Ministry of Public Works and Transport from the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Sir, push your button.
Permettez-moi d'exprimer en français.
I shall be speaking in French.
Tout d'abord, je viens exprimer.
First of all, I would like to say how grateful I am to those who've organized this session, and I'm delighted to be with you to share some of our experience in urban planning. There are 3 points I'd like to address. As I understand it, there are 3 levels in the work we do. The planning level, where you're planning things at the national and down to the local levels. Where you're trying to reflect your national, territorial, physical planning efforts at whatever level. And when you're doing in this phase, you're deciding not just on how your layout will look in a town, but also looking at response and effects of natural disasters. Then you come to the provincial and then the local, the town and district levels. And in our experience in Laos, we've tried to combine all of the levels in the work we do. Now, the second thing I want to stress is that the regulatory aspect of urban planning. First of all, you need an urban management body, again, at the top level and get down to the grassroots level, the district. And of course, we need not just a plan, but you need regulations on how to manage things. You need technical standards, particularly the most robust standards, and standards for your infrastructure, where you can protect your towns and cities from natural hazards. And there's also the question of coordination amongst the bodies which are affected, not just the management, the main body, which is the Ministry for Public Work and Transport, but all of the other ministries which may be involved. I'm thinking of natural resources and environment ministries, land resource ministries, transport and that sort of thing. And the third issue I think we need to highlight, that I want to highlight, is operational urban planning. I mean, on the basis of all of your standards, your regulations, you have a structural project to develop your urban spaces. And then you get down to the nitty-gritty, the details at the district and even the village level. We are bringing villages together to transform them into small urban centers. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup à vous. The last presenter is Mr. Ajit Gulab Chand from Mumbai, India, who is the chairman and managing director of the Hindustan Construction Company that I was pleased to learn works beyond India. They've got an office here in Switzerland as well. Ajit, over to you.
Well, what would be the role of private sector in making cities resilient? As you can see that it is very thinly represented at this table, at the panel. It's important to understand that private sector plays a great role in all the periods of disaster. When a disaster occurs at the time of search and rescue, in the rehabilitation, and also in building, design, innovation of creating infrastructure where the knowledge of the private sector, the competencies of the private sector can be brought into play. And I think there is a rich resource here that is available to the world wherever there is private sector in order to contribute. Now, how do you bring about a framework in which the cities and the state governments as well as the federal governments of various countries bring together on a platform private sector in order to seek their involvement in creating innovative design to make infrastructure resilient of a city, of a building, as well as to be able to have business continuity, to be able to restore an infrastructure that has been damaged due to disaster. I think here you have a very rich resource, but it is not primarily the responsibility of the private city, it is the city governments that need to look at it. Here again, you have a very diverse scenario around the world. You have here one city of New Jersey having many small towns, each one of them having a mayor, a very effective administration, directly involving the people in order to get going. Whereas you have a large country like India, in which there are no really city governments. Most cities are governed by the state government, and most of the states in India are bigger than many, many countries in the world. So when we have a situation that structurally does not allow, leave alone a dialogue with private sector, actually even has begun to have a conversation on creating resilience. There is always a conversation when a disaster strikes and there is blame apportioning goes on, and this goes on till for a few days and it dies out again only with promises. Now, so since the level of both discourse as well as the level of infrastructure to deal with making cities resilient differs around the world, we need to have a separate conversation by dividing the world into those different stages. And the second is, what precisely can private sector do in order to contribute? There is a rich source of knowledge, competency, as well as talent that is available to creating the necessary innovation to make cities resilient. And as Aris and I were just discussing a little while back, that while we are talking of smart cities and we are talking of sustainable cities, we need to add the word resilient because it is a part of sustainability, but needs to have a special space so that we can look at it differently. As more and more investment goes into cities, and 90% of world's GDP comes out of cities, yes, it's pollution, 90% too comes out of cities, but that, all the innovation in the world takes place in the cities. It is a center of knowledge and has been for years of civilization. I think we need to add the word resilient to the word sustainable, and I would say not just include it in the word sustainable, but add it additionally so that we can then focus on what really constitutes resilience in different parts of the world, in different areas of the landmass in creating cities. Thank you.
So this is now where we go to sort of comments from the floor, and As is always the case, there have been a number of people who, there's a microphone right over here. Oh, can you get the microphone right there? The first person I'm going to go to is Shipra Narang Suri, who's the Vice President of the International Society of City and Regional Planners, right here. I think turn around and face the audience.
Thank you. It's really been a very illuminating session, and I'd like to put forward the perspective of professional planners into this whole mix, and also kind of trying to push the discussion forward a little bit. Basically, what we've heard a lot of times and what we hear a lot of times, one of the major constraints faced by planners is political will. And we hear it over and over again. Planners operate in very difficult conditions, and political decision-making is not always evidence-based or plan-based. But here we have examples of progressive decision-makers who are wanting to make evidence-based decisions, who are wanting to move their cities forward, and who actually need help. And in that respect, what can planners do? Really, the point you made about a comprehensive approach, an approach that looks at multiple risks, as also the mayor from Venezuela said, it's not just about flooding, it's about safety, it's about earthquakes, it's about disease, it's about health, it's about, there's multiple risks in cities. And this is really where, looking at a comprehensive approach, this is really where planning comes into play. We've just heard from the private sector who say, we're not consulted. Well, here, planning is really where we can offer a platform which brings different stakeholders together, the citizens, the civil society, the private sector, technology, finance, higher levels of government, local decision makers. It's really, you need to look at a planning and a plan-based approach, and that's what we at ISOCARP definitely want to advocate for. At the same time, two dimensions that need to be considered. One is that planning systems need to change in many countries. They're weak and they're difficult to navigate. And secondly, planners need to be capacitated, but also empowered, so that they can actually influence the decision-making process, which doesn't often happen. So we're very pleased to actually work with ISDR and all of you and the group here to actually develop some of these thoughts in the run-up to the post-HFA or the HFA Mark II post-2015. Thank you very much.
We're now going to go to Mr. Javier Pava, representing the mayor of Bogota.
Gracias. Thank you. What's important for me is that UNISDR should consider the importance of planning as a strategy for DRR, and to face the changes that are caused by climate change. We have to ensure safer cities. We need to look outwards and inwards with regards to the city. If you look outwards, the cities depend on their relationships with other cities in terms of the services that they have, in terms of energy and mobility and transport. It's important that the resilience plans of each of those sectors have to be developed to ensure that services are provided by cities and that these services are provided sustainbly, because cities depend also on these services as well. This is an area which we need to consider towards the future, looking towards the future, given climate change and the effects that will have on urban centers. The second issue has to do with planning inwards. There are two key aspects here. The first is to avoid building in high-risk areas. It's important that there be zonal and building codes, you need to establish high-risk areas as being areas that are areas of conservation, nature conservation. In those areas, you have to be careful with regards to the cost of land in those areas. And you have to ensure that these ecological areas can develop sustainably with regards to the cities. It's important also to understand the relationship with nature with regards to mitigation or DRR. If you look at all the walls and the canals, those are short-term solutions. They are not sustainable long-term solutions, and they provide additional risks given climate change. So the different areas, different water bodies need to be part of that strategy, because the building of that infrastructure is very expensive and creates additional problems within the population. The other aspect has to do with built areas in high-risk areas. We have medium and large-sized cities that have part of their land in high-risk areas. So we need to have concrete planning process to recover these high-risk areas and transfer the population from higher-risk areas to safer areas, so that we can create green spaces, so that the population can use those green spaces also. And this reorganization of the territory within the city is essential, not just thinking about the movement of population to safer areas, but also considering the high-risk areas, as I said before. When we are considering urban planning, we need to consider the safety and safety aspects. Without safe building codes and safe buildings, earthquakes are going to be a higher risk and have greater impact. It's not just a question of safer buildings. It's also a question of the economic activities in the city should also be safe. And that is a question of resilience. Very clearly, we need to consider in the future how we're going to adapt to climate change. And the resilience is an important part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to go to Renia Chavarria, the mayor of Gualquaque Municipality, Telca River Basin Association from Nicaragua. Where are you? There, right there.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I am Rehana, came from Bangladesh, and my question to panel, and your discussion is very nice, and your plan is very nice, and your initiative.
Sorry, we're not taking questions, we're taking comments from the floor.
And your plan and building code plan have disabled friendly, and I work with disability. And our countries is every infrastructure and every building code is not disabled friendly, such as platform, station, and hospitalities, and everything is not disabled friendly. And I am very glad your panel discussion and mayor and city corporation and supermarket and another mayor city infrastructure is not disabled friendly in Bangladesh perspective. I recommend to you and every countries and every city infrastructure when you plant and all the disabled friendly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to go to Steve Onu, the Nigerian Association of Town Planners. Steve.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I think it has been very healthy. I think urban planning from its inception is geared towards preventing disaster. It's geared towards preventing disaster. But the problem we've had is that there is a knowledge gap between those in government, that is the authorities, and the planners. In most cases, during the implementation process, you find out that because of political interest, most government officers do not pay much attention to the plans already prepared or in the implementation. They're more concerned with development of projects that will catch votes for them, not minding what you have said in your planning process. I come from Nigeria. We have so many master plans prepared to guide the development of cities. And in most cases, what you find out is that when those plans are being implemented, planners are kept out of it. There is no relationship or coordination between the various segments of the government. The Ministry of Lands or Fiscal Planning may have prepared a plan. The Ministry of Transport will develop the highways and the roads without consultation to the provisions of the master plan. The Ministry of Environment might not even bother to find out if the waterways are protected. Sometimes you find them building drains that cannot accommodate the volume of water that is being generated from the cities, which also leads to flooding of the cities. We must have to be very proactive to find ways to accommodate the flood. I visited Singapore some years back, and in Singapore, I found out that they have about 17 reservoirs, and they harvest rain. They built about 7,000 kilometers of canals and drainages, to the extent that at no point, according to them, they are bold to talk about it, that Singapore will never get flooded. So we should begin to think about measures to control flood waters. For instance, in most developed countries, or developing countries, these runoffs are channeled straight to the river without pretreatment. And what is the implication? The water bodies are polluted. It affects the flora and the fauna. People catch fishes from such areas, and that could affect their life over a period of time, because the fishes could also ingest the pollutants that are laden in the water. So when we prepare plans, we do from site selection to analysis, we isolate areas that cannot be developed. Oftentimes, they are developed because the politicians have a way of trying to appease their supporters at the expense of the inhabitants of the city. So there is, to get over this, I think there is a need for us to begin proper education of the people, those who are being elected into government. Some of them don't have any business being in government in the first place. So there is need to educate them to know that the environment must be saved. Capacity building also is important. And then, like you said, there is also need to revise our planning regulations. make them more restrictive in view of the effects of climate change. Building codes may also have to be revised. In fact, this morning I was listening to BBC. They were making reference to the Oklahoma crisis. And then they're now saying that they're going to revise the building codes to incorporate shelter in these areas. If they had shelter where people could run in when there is an early warning, most of the people who died would not have died. So people are now beginning to look at the need to address our codes, building standards, but no matter what you do, there is need for capacity building and in education of those who are in government. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to Ebru Genser, the consultant on urban disaster resistance and a U.S. national delegate to the International Society of City and Regional Planners. There you are. And after that, I'm coming to the floor. So if you got questions, let me see your hands. We'll try and get to you.
UNSDR Urban Planning Working Group. I would like to make a short statement as we are trying to make a strategy guidance for towards the HFA2. As we try to define a strategy in our working group to successfully integrate DRR into urban planning, as a goal towards the HFA2, what are the measurables and how can we define success? These are the questions we need to address as we build on the current HFA. And as we now have the latest reviews of the HFA progress reports, we see that the fourth priority area that addresses the underlying drivers of risk, such as planning and management of human settlements, incorporating disaster risk reduction elements, has the least progressed of the 5 progress areas. How can we build upon the Making Cities Resilient campaigns, 10 essentials checklist to make progress in this area? Our speakers, our panelists today showed us what works and what needs to be done. First, comprehensive urban approach, building on public-private partnerships and with participatory planning and the pressure of civil society. 2, effective risk identification and capacity in the building level, capacity building in the local level. 3, within the same issue, addressing the complexity and interconnectedness of risk in urban areas. For instance, how damaged power systems affect water systems, transportation, as well as critical services, as we experienced in New York City with Hurricane Sandy. 4, equitable planning for DRR and post-disaster recovery. Again, going back to Hurricane Sandy and the challenges of undocumented immigrants and tenants without leases who cannot prove that they were displaced and take advantage of government funds. And 5, finally, for investment opportunities in DRR, provide an integrated approach linking DRR into development planning and into broader urban investments, building resilience not only for disasters, but also for everyday risks.
Thank you. So can we have the microphone taken to, there's 2 people here. In about the 4th row there's a gentleman with his hand up.
Thank you very much. My name is A.M. Jinadu. I'm the Director Center for Disaster Risk Management and Development Studies, Federal University of Technology, Minna, located in Nigeria. I just want to agree with the chair during the introductory session that the urbanization situation in the developing country is very, very serious, and that we have a very serious problem of poor urban planning. But I also want to note that the reason is not because we don't have town planners in these developing countries, or that maybe the town planners don't have the requisite skill. I think the reason could be attached to 2 major problems, which we have echoed over and over. The first one is the weakness of the planning institutions that we have, most especially at the local level. And then coupled with that is the problem of low political support to the planning institutions. we have very, very low support to the planners to be able to do their job, to be able to enforce the planning law. However, given this situation, one is a little bit happy because the realities of increasing risk and then disasters that we are witnessing, as well as their impact, is now raising a little bit of political consciousness. As we speak in Nigeria, because of the 2012 flooding disaster that we have, that flood was so devastating, described as the worst in the last 50 to 60 years. The government was overwhelmed, the communities were overwhelmed, and arising from that kind of a situation, there's a kind of a little effort now by the political class, okay, in the face of a disaster happening. So some state governors are now introducing little effort, making little effort, like clearing of waterways. They are trying to remove structures from the floodways, and some of them are trying to relocate population from the flood risk areas. What I want to say or want to advise is that given this situation, that disaster happenings is now forcing certain authorities to do, to make little effort. I think the UN Habitat could cash in on this opportunity and provide a little bit of direction, a little bit of technical support to some of these authorities that are forced to do something as a result of disaster. I also want to advise.
Sorry, we want to get to somebody else. So I'm going to go to the gentleman with the red shirt back there. Thank you. You've had a lot of time. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm from India. I'm representing local governance network. And my simple thing, whenever this debate happens about urban planning, being an urban planner, I often ask the question simple, is city plan really preparing by the urban planner? Because often I have seen in last 10 decades, we are all, every time we are talking this planning concept, city plans are not happening properly. Then we are talking a model, sometimes we are talking a model of Barcelona, sometimes Singapore, sometimes Bogota. The question is why we are not, if the planning concepts are not working, why not evolving a concept, something that can be accepted to Maria city? But again, the question happens, every city has its own model. So maybe one concept will not fit into every city, but what happens when we try to pose some concept into cities, then we see that it is not working. Then the second thing is that how we make, when you prepare the city plan, when you prepare the master plan, to bring the community into the city plan, many often what happens, we try to bring a lot of new concepts outside or inside, whatever, and it's really don't work in a local level or into the city planning. And most often it is like many other things, it is like some other people are influencing. So my only point is that like somebody has a health problem, definitely go to a medical, don't go to somebody else. So when the city is a similar situation, we often don't integrate with the urban planner, but we always say urban planner has not produced the proper job. So being an urban planner, I always often see this, are we these urban planners are working on city plan? And second, this is the last point. We in India, we have seen there are more than 10,000 cities has come, but often we look at all the metropolitan cities, what is happening in Mumbai, what is happening in Bangalore, what is happening like in other cities. But there are cities that going to come up by 2030, nothing has happened till date. Maybe we need to look at those cities which are going to accommodate more than 50% population of the entire globe. They are going to come up as urban population. Maybe we need to look at them also, not necessarily what is happening in all the big cities. Thank you.
I'm sorry, that's all the questions we can take. I've been signaled that we have to wrap this up at 1:45. So I just want to thank all of you for participating. I think one of the things we have to understand here is 2/3 of humanity lives along the coast. And with that, we're having a large in-migration from the rural areas to those coastal towns. So if you think the problems of disaster risk reduction are complex now, they're going to become much more complex. and they're not going to get any easier by ignoring them. So each and every one of you in your locale has to deeply engage with those issues, because the future of your community is going to depend not on the politicians, I regret to say not on the planners, but is going to depend very much on the way in which the private sector and the community engage in the transformation of their locale. That is what's going to make your community resilient. And that's going to mean, you listen to the problem in Hoboken, where they've got a single energy system that when it breaks down, it breaks down. So we're going to have to look at multiplicity of systems that give a capability of backup and resilience. If we don't do that, then we're going to face the same consequences. And I think we're going to have to look at more creative development, where we do look at some of our underground spaces. If you look at that from a city perspective, how much of your community is owned by the community in the form of roads? What does that open up in the capability of some development of some underground spaces that would give the capacity to absorb that kind of density and that kind of in-migration that's coming? These are the challenges. And the future of this century belongs to urban areas. And it's not going to be solved by your national governments. It's not going to be solved by international agencies. It's going to be solved in situ by each and every one of us getting deeply involved. So turn off the television, forget about tweeting, forget about YouTube, and get involved where you are. That is going to be the most important transformative role you can play in your locale. So I thank you very much for participating, but I pass now to you the challenge. Engage at your local level and make sure that your community is resilient into the future. And if you haven't joined the Making Our Cities Resilient, join it. Get involved. It's not going to happen by itself. It's going to happen because the public is engaged. Thank you all very much for being with us today.